Have you ever had an idea that was so amazing it could change the world? This podcast is called This Could Change Everything. I'm Joe Kim, and I'm a professor of psychology, neuroscience, and behavior at McMaster University, where I also lead the McCall MacBain Postdoctoral Fellows Teaching and Leadership Program. I love to talk with young researchers about their game-changing work. Today, we're learning about how fostering a children's rights movement could create a better world for all of us. Does that sound right?
I think it does, yep.
Okay, let's begin with a brief introduction. Can you tell everyone who you are and what you're doing at the university?
I'm Dr. Emily Scherzinger, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at the McMaster Children and Youth University, where I study children's rights. I do a lot of community engagement with youth and children, and then I also teach.
Okay, so let's talk about your research. Can you give us a big overview?
Absolutely. So when I started my postdoctoral fellowship, we were looking into how children experienced schooling during COVID. And we conducted a massive array of interviews with teachers, students, parents, and we came to the conclusion through student interviews that the students' reactions, even as youth and as children, were quite complex and on par with adult experiences during COVID. We've had children actively say, I really hated being home from school because I missed my friends, but I got to spend so much more time with my baby sister and I didn't miss this important part of her life. That sounds like an adult to me. Being able to hold two things and evaluate them and acknowledge that there is good and bad. The youth really understood the complexity of what was happening to them, and they often felt ambivalent. So they were able to hold these two truths at once. And that's something complex that we assume children can't do, when in reality, they're actually primed to do that because they don't experience the same level of socialization over the years that adults have. And so that led us to kind of start asking more questions about how youth experience these complex concepts. So our most recent research project is on AI and polarization and misinformation and how youth understand it and how they experience AI polarization in their worlds.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Oh, yeah.
So let's start by looking at the status quo. How has our view of childhood changed over the centuries? And when did the concept of childhood as a distinct phase of life emerge?
That's a great question. And actually, I want to be fully transparent. Something I just learned this year. I've always been interested in how innocence and childhood interact. As someone who was a white girl who grew up in the Toronto suburbs, I was afforded a certain level of innocence that my racialized counterparts were not. And so I think that that's always been something I've pursued. But the actual construction of childhood is so fascinating because it's recent. Our idea of childhood as kids who don't work is so different from when childhood began in the Industrial Revolution. Children were workers. And in some areas of the country and the world still are. They're farmhands, they're babysitters, they're tutors, children put in a lot of unpaid labor. But back when they were considered paid laborers, they were the ones in the factories fixing the machines with their tiny little fingers because they could actually get in there. And they experienced a lot of oppression, a lot of violence, a lot of workplace safety hazards. And then once that kind of falls towards the wayside and we get towards the wars, we start seeing childhood as something worth protecting. And we start to instill all this value in the child as innocent and needs a perfect childhood. They are an adult in waiting, and they need a childhood that is good so that they become a good adult.
So if protecting children from, this forced labor is one of the things that we should strive to do, what are other rights that children should have?
Children need to have a right to complexity. Children need a right to privacy. And the laws that we are seeing pushed in Alberta by Premier Danielle Smith are essentializing children so that they are flattened. They are nothing but innocence that needs to be protected. I think that does a real disservice to children. one of the policies that I think is the most harmful is that they are suggesting children, if they want to change their name or their pronouns, need to have parental permission. That right to privacy is crucial here because we also know children are an incredibly vulnerable population to abuse. The abuse of children and, of course, women, but children has risen dramatically since COVID, and it is a huge problem. And so for them to potentially want to explore their gender, try out a new identity, change their hats like kids do, and then have that taken to a parent who is a potentially homophobic or transphobic, that's really scary. Kids should be able to experiment in private and have that just be their own private world, just like adults are afforded that dignity.
Where do parents fit into all of this? What's their role?
That's a great question, Joe. And I want to caveat this and say I'm not a parent, but I was a kid.
So was I.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. But I remember what it was like to be a kid. And I remember my privacy being violated. And I felt as though I couldn't figure things out for myself. I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't afforded that space. And I think that if we afford every human, no matter their age, space to be themselves with support and, guardrails for sure, but support, I think we would be a lot better off. And so I do think parents have a very important role in supporting their child no matter what, because at the end of the day, this kid is here. And you have to, and you're responsible for them. We're all responsible for them. And we need to make sure that we are providing that support to them, not just on the individual family level, but as a society. And I think that care gets individualized to parents when really all of us should care about kids because they are our future of society.
So as you were saying that, a memory that just came to my mind was as a kid, I had to take piano lessons, and I hated it. And I did it for about a year, and then I remember when we had some guests come over. Oh, maybe you could play something on the piano, and I absolutely did not like it at all. I guess I was performing, right? And it wasn't even something that I enjoyed. I ended up quitting. The world lost a potential pianist. Yeah. But I think, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think we force kids into things way too easily. And as someone who was also forced into piano, I really feel for you. But I think that, when we force children into these roles that we set out for them, whether that's a specific gender role because you were told the sex of your child is a girl, whether that is an extracurricular that causes them to have to eat dinner in the car every night on their way to dance practices when they'd rather be eating dinner at a table with their family. These kinds of things matter to kids because their worlds are a lot smaller than ours. We need to take them seriously. These are humans, and they have rights, and they should be respected, and they can make their choices.
Yeah, along those lines, I'm thinking about those stage parents driving their kids to auditions, or at Little League, the parent that is screaming at their kid or at the officials. It's not going to be enjoyable for the child.
No, and even in our institutions, the way that we evaluate children, I remember hearing parents say, you got a 98% on that test? Where's the extra 2%? That's not making learning fun. That's not holding children to a reasonable standard. You're telling a child that they have to be perfect when society is already telling them they're not because they're a kid. They're not perfect. Adults are the ones who are perfect. We have a hierarchy in our society that I think is really problematic between adults and youth. And these are just examples of them.
Is it okay as a parent for me to try to build my personal values onto my child, or am I imposing?
That's a great question, and something that parents struggle with all the time. There is that tension there, right, where you don't know, am I brainwashing my kid in a lot of different ways? But I think that youth are able to understand and take a lot of different ideas and synthesize them. Mm-hmm. Children are able to understand complexity. They're able to hold two things at once and more.
So when my daughter was, I think, about 3 or 4, She asked me what might seem like an innocent question, but I thought it was a very adult-like question. She asked me, is Santa Claus real?
Yeah.
And what I decided to tell her was the truth. So the way that I did it was I asked her, well, I don't know, what do you think? And she said, I don't know, but it would be weird if he went down the chimney and he caught on fire.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, is Paw Patrol, is Dora real? And so it's just a cartoon, but it's kind of fun to think of them as real. And I said, I think that's a good way to think about Santa Claus.
That's such a great conclusion to come to. And the one thing I'm going to say is you asked her opinion first. That's it. You didn't actively tell her, oh, guess what? This is the way the world works. Santa Claus isn't blah, blah, blah. But I don't want to say anything because maybe a parent's listening in the car with their kid or something. But, I think it's important to recognize, like, what do you think? How did you make sense of this? That sounds reasonable to me. Have you thought about this? Asking kids questions is, I think, the greatest thing you can do because it's that strong basis of inquiry-based learning, right? They learn to create meaning and knowledge with you as you ask questions and pursue further. And those questions provide great guardrails. Mm-hmm. I see this all the time in schools. I have kids who, they dig up dirt and they have to fill out a sheet about what color it is, and they're going to write, because they're in grade 5, poop. But once you ask, what color is poop? Brown. They know. They're just making sense of the world differently. Yeah. And we need to recognize that the meaning they make is valid.
Yeah. And I think sometimes as a parent, admitting when you don't know the answer is also good, because one of the questions that she asked me also as a child was, what happens when you die?
Oh, that's a great question.
And
I would love to know.
I don't know, but what do you think?
But that's not imposing your values. That's asking her questions. And I think that's important to recognize is that, you don't know. There are lots of different schools of thought about what happens after you die, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's up to her what she adopts, right?
What would a world that recognizes children's rights look like? And are there any examples in the world that we could draw upon right now?
One of the best examples that we have is Japan, which is a culture that has a more collectivist mindset and ideology at the base of their culture. And so you see children walking around all the time without parents. You see it in, for example, this really great Netflix series called Old Enough, where kids are sent out with a grocery list to a grocery store just a couple blocks away, and they are asked to pick up the groceries. And it is a bit of a, oh, look how silly these kids are trying to carry these grocery bags that are bigger than them. So you get that kind of slapstick element, but also you do see these kids going up to random adults, asking for help, saying, oh, what is a tangerine? Which one is a tangerine? And the adults help them and move on. And, when you build a society that has this fundamental value of children in it, then you see that in the way people interact. Children are safe to walk around, use the trains, things like that. But in comparison, when you see kids walking around outside here, one of our first reactions is, where's the adult? When I think it's unfortunate that we have gotten rid of a lot of kind of third spaces where kids can hang out. The mall was always huge for me when I was a kid, of course, but parks, playgrounds, community centers that are closing, there's not enough funds and resources to keep these places open. And I think it's a tragedy because this is where kids go to understand and learn and figure out who they are in the world in a safe environment, because our environment as it stands is not naturally safe for them.
We live in a world now with lots and lots of online media and influencers. Mm-hmm. So what does a children's rights movement look like online in the age of monetization from YouTube and TikTok and various media channels?
Yeah, this is a really great question, especially with the research we're doing on AI. And We're seeing now governments, as Trudeau announced with the federal budget, pouring money into research on AI because AI is taking advantage of children. We're seeing a problem with the radicalization of youth, often boys, who are watching one video out of curiosity and the algorithm sends them farther down a rabbit hole. They get sucked into a feedback loop. AI is producing a very volatile, not necessarily always toxic, but volatile and unpredictable environment on the internet. And so we need to do research into how that affects youth. And we need to understand exactly from their point of view. And we need them to be the ones asking the research questions, you know? How are they affected by this? And we don't have a space in our society where youth can actually go out and do the research alongside us. And that's why the McMaster Children and Youth University is great, because we have youth advisory boards. We have interviews with kids that are then, that's the research question. That's what they're interested in. So that co-producing of knowledge is what we need in order to fully understand what we're dealing with here, because no one knows. We know algorithms are biased. We know that they are trained in specific ways that don't always benefit our society, that reinforce stereotypes. So how does that work with kids? We don't know.
Okay, let's pull back the lens. How could recognizing children's rights fundamentally change the world that we live in?
We would learn a lot more if we listen to kids. I think if we had some patience and let them figure it out. I can't tell you the amount of times I'm in elementary classrooms as part of my job, and I'm sitting there for 5 minutes while the kid just stutters and runs over the same sentence and the question over and over, but I don't say anything because at the end they have a question. Why do gravity wells work? What does soil biodiversity look like on Mars? Like, these are amazing questions. These are great questions I've never even thought of. I think that if we really did look at children's rights and childism within our society, we would learn a lot more about the complexities of youth. And I think we would learn a lot about ourselves as humans, as a culture, specifically our Western culture. I think it would reveal a lot to us that I don't know if we're ready to always reckon with.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a researcher interested in education, you know, one of the things that I'm really curious about is that I think children start off very curious, ask questions, and then somewhere along the line in the education system, they stop asking questions and they're less curious.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out how do we connect the motivation to lifelong learning here.
Yeah. I will say I was just in an elementary class in Hamilton last week, and one kid turned to me and said, I have a question, but I don't want to get yelled at. And I said, you won't get yelled at. You can ask me the question. And he said, I don't know. And he was so scared. And it was just in that moment, I was like, this is a representation of what a lot of things that are wrong with the way we treat students and kids, but also the way we think about childhood and the way that we think about development. Questioning and learning is a huge part of development, and it's just not valued enough in our societal institutions, especially our educational institution. And if you push down that questioning so young, you've basically circumnavigated a path for the lifelong learner. You're not going to encourage them to continue asking questions. They're not going to become a lifelong learner, which is what we need. We need critical, thoughtful, engaged lifelong learners in our society in order to really get at the base of whatever we're trying to do here as humans. So I think the important thing is, you know, engaging with the questions, because once you start there, you've set a foundation, right?
So you mentioned that you're a former child yourself.
Indeed.
Why is this issue so important to you as a researcher?
My childhood wasn't the best, and I looked around me and I saw that with a lot of my friends as well. We have a lot of issues in our institutions, like bullying, like a lack of access for disabled youth, and many other issues, racism, transphobia. And I see that happen on the adult level, and I wonder if we start with youth, if we start respecting them and showing and modeling that you can respect people that are different than you, people that are bigger than you, that are older than you, that are younger than you. I think we would be able to start laying a foundation that, we are all humans here. We're all trying to get along. We're all trying to figure it out. And I think it would actually bring our society together rather than the amount of polarization we're seeing right now, which is the biggest threat to global democracy, according to the World Economic Forum in January 2024. It's misinformation and polarization. So if we start modeling what we want to be, I think that would really help us.
What's the next step in your research journey?
Well, we did the literature review for the AI project, and we are going to start we're going to do some gamification of workshops so that we can measure what the youth's kind of interest in the research is, what questions they have, and then we're going to do interviews asking them what they're interested in, and that directs our research. And then we take that to our youth advisory board, check it over with them, make sure we're on the right path and we're honoring the research questions that the youth created. And then we keep going and we publish all together. So hopefully we have a partnership with HWDSB or the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, and I'm really looking forward to talking to some of the kids that I've already worked with because I'm in and out of those schools. And it's just, they're so thoughtful and intelligent. And, Hamilton has such an interesting kind of atmosphere of class in terms of you have people from higher incomes on the mountain, where you also have kids who go to private schools, and then you have kids in inner city in the Ward 3 neighborhood that I live in who are going to public schools. And I just think that there's such a wide array of complex identities, and we're gonna learn something really cool.
Given your research and everything that we've learned today, how do you see the future of the children's rights movement? Are you feeling optimistic, pessimistic, or somewhere in between?
Oh, God.
Sorry that I caught you off guard.
I don't want to say, honestly, this is the problem. I don't want to say I'm pessimistic, but I am naturally a cynical person, and I am so scared for kids. I'm so scared for them. The kids that I work with in high schools, they're amazing. I love Gen Z, Gen Alpha. The kids are going to be all right. But the slog they have to get through to be all right, the way the world is being set up, the lack of resources, the funding from government agencies, the systematic closures of third spaces, the move online and misinformation. And I just worry for them, and I want them to be okay. I'm hopeful because humans are resilient. And if nothing, COVID has shown us that youth are some of the most resilient among us. But they've seen a lot of damage in the past half decade, and they've seen a lot of their rights stripped away. And I feel for them, and I hope the best for them, and I'm trying my best to make it better. But it's a scary environment, and they feel it. And all the conversations I've had with kids, with parents, with teenagers, they know and they feel it, and they are scared as well. And so I'm hopeful, but again, complex.
Cautiously optimistic.
Let's put it that way.
Okay. So the kids are all right. It's the adults that need to adapt.
Exactly.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah, I agree.
Emily, it's been a pleasure. And I want to present you with this gift of a purple rubber ducky that my daughter and I recently won at a competition, and she consented to give it to you because she knew that we were going to be talking about children's rights movement.
I'm going to put this on my desk right in front of my monitor. I'm going to look at it oh my goodness, Monica. I'm going to cry. It's so sweet. I love kids so much. They're so cool. Awesome. Thank you, Joe and Monica.
I'm Joe Kim. Thanks for listening.
This Could Change Everything is produced by the McCall MacBain Postdoctoral Fellows Teaching and Leadership Program at McMaster University. Check the show notes for more information about our program and Emily's research. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Happy researching!